They came for me with smiles on their faces. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the words, the smiles. By the time I figured out what that dinner really was, it was already too late to pretend I hadn't heard it. And what happened in the weeks after the phone calls, the lies they told people, what my brother did to my car, I never saw any of it coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually began. I grew up being the responsible one. Not because anyone asked me to be. It just happened the way things do in families where one kid watches and learns, and the other two just live. My older brother, Marcus, was the charmer, the one who could talk his way out of anything, and usually did. My younger sister, Bree, was the baby, permanently, regardless of the fact that she was 26 years old by the time any of this happened. And then there was me, Maya, the one in the middle, who paid attention. My parents, my father, and my mother were not bad people. I want to be clear about that. Even now, they were not monsters. They were people who made choices, and some of those choices carved grooves into our family that ran so deep we never even noticed we were walking in them. One of those grooves was money. My father had owned a small landscaping business for most of my childhood. It was steady, not spectacular. My mother worked part-time at a dental office. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either, not in the way that lets you stop thinking about it. I understood that early. I internalized it in a way my siblings never seemed to. When I was 19, I got a partial scholarship to a state school and took out loans for the rest. I worked 25 hours a week at a campus coffee shop and sent $200 home every month because my father had thrown his back out and the business was struggling. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. I just did it. That set the tone for the next decade. By the time I was 28, I had a decent job in healthcare administration, a small apartment 40 minutes from my parents' house, and a habit of saying yes that I hadn't yet learned to examine. Marcus had moved back in with my parents at 29 after a failed business venture. His second, and Bree, had never really left. She'd done a semester of community college, decided it wasn't for her, and settled into a kind of pleasant indefiniteness that my parents seemed perfectly happy to fund. I told myself it was fine. Families support each other. That's what they do. What I didn't let myself think about too hard was the math. How my parents had helped Marcus with $20,000 when his first business failed. How they'd bought Bree a car, a nice one, when she turned 22. How every time I mentioned something I needed, the subject shifted, or my mother would say things were tight right now, or my father would change the topic to Marcus's new plan, or Bree's new interest. I told myself I didn't need the help the way they did. I was fine on my own. I had made myself fine on my own. What I didn't understand yet was that I had trained everyone around me to believe that too. The call came on a Thursday in October. My mother's voice was warm, almost artificially, so the kind of warm that in hindsight I should have recognized. She said they were having a small family dinner on Saturday. Nothing big, just the 5 of us, she said. She'd make my father's pot roast. It had been a while since we'd all been together. I said yes without thinking. I always said yes. I brought a bottle of wine. I remember standing in the wine aisle for 10 minutes, trying to decide between 2 reds, landing on a Cabernet, thinking my father would appreciate it. That was the headspace I was in. Wine selection. Normal Saturday dinner thoughts. I got there at 6. The table was already set. Marcus was on the couch watching football, which he muted when I walked in a gesture that registered somewhere in my body before my brain caught up with it. Bree was helping my mother in the kitchen, which she never did. My father was sitting in his armchair with his hands folded in his lap. No one was relaxed. I noticed it the way you notice a sound you can't name yet. Something slightly off about the frequency of the room. My mother brought out the food. We sat down. We talked about nothing. The weather, a neighbor's renovation, something Marcus had seen on the news. I poured the wine. My father said it was good. We ate. And then, somewhere between the main course and whatever was supposed to come after it, my father set down his fork and cleared his throat. He said they'd been doing some planning. Estate planning. He said it in the tone people use when they want something to sound administrative. I nodded. I thought, good. They're being responsible. Finally, he said they had worked with an attorney over the past few months. He said they had made some decisions about the property, the house, the small piece of land behind it that had been in my mother's family, the savings account they'd been building since before I was born. I was still nodding. Still eating, actually. I had my fork in my hand. He said they had decided to leave everything to Marcus and Bree. I set my fork down. Not dramatically. I just set it down. I looked at my father, then at my mother, then at Marcus, who was looking at his plate, then at Bree, who was looking at me with an expression I still can't fully decode, somewhere between guilt and the particular discomfort of someone who got what they wanted and doesn't want to watch you find out. I asked my father to repeat what he said. He did. He said, and this is the part I have replayed more times than I can count, he said, that Marcus and Bree needed the security more than I did. He said I had always been independent. He said I was capable, and they had never worried about me. He said this like it was a compliment. My mother reached across the table and touched my hand. She said she hoped I understood. She said I had always been the strong one. I looked at her hand on mine. I thought about the $200 a month I had sent them when I was 19, and working a coffee shop job at 5 in the morning. I thought about the $1,200 I had lent Marcus 4 years ago that he had never mentioned again. I thought about every holiday I had driven 40 minutes each way, every time I had shown up when something broke or someone needed something, every time I had made myself useful and undemanding and easy. The strong one. I pulled my hand back. I asked them calmly, because I was still operating on the assumption that there was a version of this that made sense. I asked them when they had made this decision. My father said the paperwork had been finalized 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, while I had been texting my mother about a recipe she wanted. While I had been making plans for this dinner, I asked if they had considered telling me before it was finalized. Before the attorney, before the signatures. My mother said they hadn't wanted to upset me. I sat with that for a moment. Then I stood up. I wasn't shaking. I was very, very still. I said, I'm not going to make a scene. But I need you to understand something. Everything you just listed as reasons I don't need this. My independence, my capability, the fact that you never worried about me, those aren't things that happened to me. Those are things I built, while I was also helping hold this family together. And I did that without ever being asked, and without ever being compensated, and without ever once making you feel guilty about it. And now you're telling me that's why I don't deserve what my siblings get. My father started to say something about fairness. I said, I'm not asking you to change it. I'm just making sure you heard what I said. Then I picked up my bag. I thanked my mother for the food, because I was raised with manners even when manners felt insane, and I walked out. I sat in my car for a long time before I started driving. I want to tell you that I went home and cried and then felt better. That would be a clean version of the story. What actually happened was worse, and then stranger, and then in some ways clarifying in a way I didn't expect. The first call came Sunday morning. It was Marcus. He didn't apologize. He explained. He said I needed to understand their perspective. He said our parents had been worried about him, his mental health, his finances, his sense of direction for a long time. He said Bree had never been as resilient as me. He said I should take it as a sign of how much they trusted me. I listened to the whole thing. When he finished, I said, Marcus, did you ask them to do this? He was quiet for a second too long. I said, that's what I thought. I hung up. The second call came from my mother that evening. She was crying. She said she hadn't slept. She said she loved me. She said she hoped I could find it in my heart to understand. She said the word understand 4 times in 3 minutes. What she didn't say, and I noticed the shape of what was missing, was that she was sorry. Not once. I told her I needed some time. She said of course. Then, 2 days later, I found out from a cousin that my mother had called her to explain the situation. My mother's version of the situation, apparently, was that I had stormed out of dinner, refused to hear them out, and was making things very difficult for the family. I had sat quietly through the entire announcement. I had not raised my voice. I had left without breaking anything or saying anything I would have to take back. And somehow, I was the one making things difficult. That was the week I understood something I should have understood a long time ago. It's not enough to behave well in a moment. Some people will rewrite the moment regardless. I stopped answering calls from family members I wasn't close to. I didn't explain myself. Explaining yourself to people who have already decided the story is an exhausting waste of time. Then my brother did something that surprised even me. I came out of my apartment building on a Wednesday morning to find a long scratch along the driver's side of my car. Deep, deliberate, the kind that runs from one end to the other, with too much consistency to be accidental. I stood there looking at it for a full minute. I didn't have proof. I want to be clear about that. I didn't have a recording. I didn't have a witness. I didn't have video from a camera that happened to catch it. What I had was the knowledge that Marcus had been to my neighborhood twice in the past week, that I had not given him my address in any recent conversation, and that the scratch appeared the morning after I had declined to respond to a group family text that was clearly designed to pressure me into a reconciliation call. I filed a police report, not because I thought it would go anywhere, because I wanted there to be a record, because I had spent enough of my life absorbing things quietly and leaving no trace of them. I also called a locksmith that afternoon and changed my locks, even though Marcus had never had a key. It was about the feeling of it, closing things off, making the perimeter smaller. Here's what I didn't do, and I think this matters. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell my story online, not then. I didn't text my mother about the car. I didn't reach out to Bree, who had sent me a string of increasingly emotional voice messages that I had listened to once each and then left unanswered. I didn't call my father, who had gone quiet in a way that felt, honestly, like relief on his end. The relief of a person who has done something uncomfortable and is now waiting for it to stop being uncomfortable. I went to therapy. I'd seen a therapist before, briefly, in my mid-20s, and I called her and restarted. What I said to her in the first session back was, "I don't think I'm angry about the money. I think I'm angry because I believed something that wasn't true." She asked me what I had believed. I said I had believed that if you showed up for people, they would see you, not reward you necessarily, just see you, register that you were there, that you were trying, that you had given things up to be present. I had believed that was a kind of currency. Not financial, just human. She didn't tell me I was wrong to have believed it. She also didn't tell me I was right. She just let me sit with it, and slowly I started to understand something. I had been invisible by design, not their design mine. I had made myself easy. I had made myself low maintenance. I had made myself the one they didn't have to worry about, which meant I was also the one they didn't have to think about. I had built my own invisibility, and then felt hurt when no one could see me. That didn't make what they did right. Let me be clear about that. What they did, the secrecy, the decision made without a conversation, the framing of my self-sufficiency as a reason to deprive me, was not okay. It is still not okay. I'm not performing forgiveness I don't feel, but I had participated in something. I had spent years sending the message that I didn't need anything from them, and they had believed me, and then I had expected them to know, somehow, that I still wanted to matter. You can't outsource that. No one can read that particular silence. And eventually, you have to stop being angry that they couldn't. My mother called me 6 weeks after the dinner. Not to argue, just to talk. I answered. She asked how I was. I said I was okay. That was true, more than it had been. She said she missed me. I said I missed her too. That was also true, in the specific, complicated way that you can miss someone who has hurt you, because missing them and holding them accountable are not mutually exclusive. She asked if I would come to Thanksgiving. I said I needed to think about it. She said she understood. And then I don't know what made her say it. Maybe it was 6 weeks of thinking. Maybe she'd talked to someone herself, she said. I think we handled this wrong, Maya. Not. I'm sorry. Not. We made a mistake. But we handled this wrong. Which for my mother, who does not say difficult things easily, was something. I said, yes, you did. She didn't argue. She just sat with it on the phone. I told her that I wasn't ready to act like everything was normal. That I would think about Thanksgiving. That I needed her to understand that I was not going to keep showing up in the same way I had been, expecting different results. That things between us would have to look different, or I wasn't willing to do it. She said she understood. I said, I need you to not just say that. I need you to actually mean it. She said, I'm trying to. I believed her. A little. Enough to keep the door open, not enough to walk back through it yet. I did not go to Thanksgiving. I spent it with a friend from work and her family, who were loud and irreverent and had no idea about any of this, which was exactly what I needed. I ate too much sweet potato casserole and watched football with people who weren't watching me watch football, and it was fine. Better than fine. It was just a meal where no one needed anything from me, and I didn't owe anyone anything. On the drive home, I thought about the version of me who would have gone, who would have driven the 40 minutes, brought something, held her feelings carefully in both hands the whole time so they didn't spill and ruin the occasion, who would have hugged everyone and helped clean up and driven home exhausted in a way that wasn't about the drive. I was a little sad for her, and a little relieved to not be her anymore. Marcus texted me that night. It said, "Happy Thanksgiving, sis. Hope you're good." I didn't respond. I'm not interested in the performance of normalcy. Not anymore. I want to tell you something about the inheritance, separate from the feelings. I am not financially ruined by this. I want to be honest about that. I have my job, my apartment, my savings. I have what I built. My parents' estate is not a sum that would have changed my life. But here's what people sometimes misunderstand when they hear a story like this. The money is not the point. It is never really the point. The point is what the decision represents. It is a formal, legal, attorney-signed document that says, "We see two kinds of children in this family, and you are the kind who doesn't need our care, the kind we don't have to protect, the kind we trust to be fine." And maybe they're right. Maybe I will be fine. But there's a difference between being fine because you're resilient and being fine because you had no choice. And there's a difference between trusting someone to handle things and simply not asking whether they need help. I was never asked. Not once. Across the entire 10 years I was quietly filling in the gaps of this family, was I ever asked, "Are you okay? Do you need anything? Is this too much?" The absence of that question is what I kept returning to, not the will. The question that was never asked. Bree called me in December. She was crying before I even said hello. She said she felt terrible. She said she hadn't known it would feel like this. She said she loved me, and she didn't want our parents' decision to come between us. I listened to her cry for a while. Then I said, "Bree, I love you too, and I'm not angry at you in the way I was. But I need you to understand something. You're crying about this right now. It's making this about your feelings. And I've spent a long time managing other people's feelings about things that were happening to me. I don't want to do that anymore." She got quiet. I said, "If you want a real relationship with me, it has to be built on something different than what we've had. Equal, honest, not you taking and me giving, and both of us pretending that's just how we are." She said she wanted that. I said I hoped she meant it. We have talked a few times since then, carefully, like two people learning a different language together. I don't know yet what it will become, but I'm not writing it off. She's my sister. That means something to me, even when it's complicated. My father has not called me alone since the dinner. He sends occasional texts, a photo of the garden, a link to something he thought I'd like. I respond briefly. We are in a phase of careful, distant politeness that I think he finds easier than confrontation, and I find easier than pretending. Maybe someday he'll say something real. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not closing the door. Here's what I know now that I didn't know before. Being the strong one is not a personality. It is a role. And like any role, it was written by circumstances and reinforced by repetition until it felt like identity, until I couldn't tell the difference between who I was and who I had agreed to be. You can love your family and still decide that the version of yourself you've been performing for them is one you're ready to retire. Those two things can be true at the same time. You can grieve a relationship while also protecting yourself from it. You can leave a seat at the table and also stop sitting in it. The hardest part, the part I'm still working on, is the voice that says, if you had just kept going, kept giving, kept being easy, maybe they would have eventually seen it. Maybe the recognition was one more year away. Maybe if you'd just been patient. That voice is a liar. I know that. I know that the recognition was never coming because I had made it impossible to ask for. I had made myself too low maintenance to require it, too capable to deserve it, too strong to need it. No one is coming to reward you for suffering quietly. That is not how it works. So now I practice something different. I say what I need. I ask for things before I give them. I let people know when something is too much, instead of adjusting my own bones to fit the available space. It is uncomfortable. It is slow. I am not good at it yet. But I am my own person, not a role, not a function, not the one they don't have to worry about. Just a person, still learning what that means. If any part of this felt familiar to you, if you've ever been the strong one until it broke you, I want you to know you're not alone in it. Drop a comment and tell me, what was the moment you realized you were worth asking about too? I'd really like to know.